Good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome each of you to our decline in enrollment conversation. I want to give a couple of minutes as people are continuing to join this very important topic. Some of you might know, for a little bit of context, there have been some conversations around declining enrollment in Denver, but also nationwide. A couple of news stories very directly pertaining to the Denver ecosystem, in addition to looking at what's happening with the declining enrollment committee. So for this afternoon, I have a lovely Anita Bañuelos, who's going to be joining us today to chat a little bit more about what's happening and how is it affecting our students and our schools. We again are going to be joining or waiting a couple of minutes as people are continuing to join. But thank you again for being here this afternoon. And as we are waiting, I'll just share a little bit more about the topic, and also as part of our conversation with Anita will be how you can get involved, how you can learn more about this topic, and also some resources out in the community that will be beneficial as we are seeing how the decline in enrollment in DPS can affect not just students and families, but also the communities in which the schools might be affected throughout the city. Awesome. So we're going to get started. And once again, thank you again for being here this evening. My name is Amber Suero, and I work for Rooted. I am a partner of advocacy and community partnerships. And we are pleased to be here today to share with you some very important information about the decline in enrollment and what's happening here in Denver. So for, like I mentioned, we are here with Anita Bañuelos. We're going to have an important conversation about what's happening here in DPS and how you can get engaged and involved in next steps. So a little bit more information. Enrollment declines are happening throughout the city, the state, the country, and even international. So this is not something unique just to Denver or DPS. And in addition to that, we are seeing that very specific regions in the city are being affected more than others. For instance, Southwest Denver is seeing about a 31% decline, Northwest Denver about a 23% decline, and Central Denver about a 22% decline. And this is information that came out of Brian Eschbacher research, which we're going to be sharing with you later on. Before we start, if you want to keep informed about our upcoming events and other goings in the district, be sure to sign up for a newsletter and follow us also on social media. Once again, Amber Suero, I am the partner of advocacy and community partnership for Rooted. In addition to just being part of the Rooted team, I am a proud DPS parent. My daughter is a high schooler, one of the high schools in the Southeast Denver at T-Day. And with my trajectory, I'm extremely passionate about education. I used to work for DPS with the family and community engagement for 9 years, advocating for support services for families in the far Northeast and in the Southwest. I've worked in advocacy for over 17 years, and I'm extremely passionate about lifting the voices that are typically not engaged when important conversations like declining enrollment come to play, and what we can do to engage and ensure that our family voices and our community voices are at the table. So Rooted also, in addition to the work that I do, we are extremely passionate about advocacy for students, especially disrupting systems of inequity when it comes to education for Black and Brown students very specifically. We also thrive at pushing for community-driven change. We partner with a ton of different advocacy groups, including with DPS in the district, to ensure transparency and accountability and offer up spaces for students to thrive and to have access to high-quality schools. With that, I want to also take a second to introduce or have Anita introduce herself, who will be joining us in the conversation today. So, Anita.
Hi, thank you, Amber, for having me this evening. I'm really excited to talk about all the work that I have done in Southwest Denver. Born and raised in Southwest Denver, Denver Public School graduate, and also alumni of Denver Kids Incorporated. I've been here for my whole entire life, and I have seen a lot of changes within Southwest Denver, increase of enrollment, decrease of enrollment, change of transportation within Southwest Denver. So I'm really excited to get into the conversation.
Awesome. It's important to share that as part of our conversation. We need to highlight that DPS has forecast a 6% decline in K-12 enrollment for the school year 2025-2026, which I think it is very important conversation to have and to ensure that we are sharing with community how this can impact their students, but also the communities that we serve, the school cultures and whatnot. For viewers, please feel free to type your questions in the comment area and we will address them at the end of our discussion. As I mentioned, today we'll be discussing the decline in enrollment and what factors are at play and what it means for our schools and communities as well. We want to share too that as part of our conversation, we'll be having a follow-up chat, also a Facebook Live in Spanish starting at 5:30. We'll be discussing the same topic in Spanish for our Spanish viewers. Anita, with that, I know that you live in the Southwest Denver and you've done a tremendous work over there doing advocacy for students and families in that area. With your first-hand experience on the enrollment boom and now the decline in the Southwest, can you tell us a little bit more about what your thoughts are on how the enrollment evolved and the decline, and also your experience in some committees and community organizers in the Southwest?
Sure. So like I said, I have been in Southwest Denver my whole life. I have seen a lot of the different changes while I was a current student. First of all, so when I went to West High School, the termination of transportation was a big issue for high school students. And then, as I got older, I went to college, I came back, and then I started to get into advocacy because the first time I know that schools were closing was Richel Middle School, which is now Richel Campus. My niece attended the school, and so that's what kind of got me engaged in education. In 2011, 2012, I was the co-chair of the Southwest Community for Quality Education that was comprised of administration, our school board representative, parents, community members, all sorts of individuals coming together to talk about the enrollment boom during that time. And so we had more students than we had schools and seats. So then when we were talking about that, we were talking about also the quality of schools in Southwest Denver. And that's where, we were talking about other options that other parts of the city had. So for example, one of the requests was, another Strive, a DST, DCIS, and then also supporting of a lot of our neighborhood schools. And then as you can tell, the last few years, there was a lot of changes and movements within the city and county of Denver. So a lot of the students' families have moved out of Southwest Denver, which then causes, the effect of declining enrollment. And so right now, that's what a lot of our schools are struggling, not only, like you said, in the city, but national.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I think that you bring that perspective of kind of like the history on, the Southwest specifically had way too many students. And as a way, community were advocating for more, for different quality of schools in the Southwest and diverse types of schools to ensure that those students were receiving a similar education as other parts of the city as well. You mentioned DSST, Grand Beacon, Strive, and whatnot. So I appreciate that context because I think it is important to be able to understand kind of like the motions on there was an influx of students, now we see a decline. So I appreciate that. So the decline in enrollment is not just here in Denver, like you said, like I said, in sharing and also looking at Eschbacher's report. It's not just in Colorado, statewide. We even heard in some other countries that are experiencing very similar challenges with the decline in enrollment. According to the Eschbacher report, some of the factors that contribute to the decline in enrollment is the low birth rates, not just in Denver, Colorado, but nationwide. as well. And then another piece is something that we have been hearing a lot about, is that the different gentrifications are happening throughout our city due to the increasing of the housing prices. The market is, there's a deficit on accessible homes, accessible housing, and the cost of the housing for our low-income families is really hard for them to keep up. So families are moving out of the city and even the state. So with that in mind, Anita, can you share with us your thoughts as far as like, what are some other areas that you think that are contributing to that decline in enrollment?
Well, previously I did work for the city and county of Denver, so I know, a lot of the boom happened with, the zoning changes within the city, the gentrification of certain neighborhoods. Certain neighborhoods were unaffordable, and then, then it kind of started to spread in Southwest Denver. It spread in far Northeast. A lot of the historical under marginalized communities have changed, and they became affordable to certain groups of people. And then, the people that have been there for historically a long time have, unable to afford that. And a lot of times too, the saying, families did not stay there generationally. They moved, they went to different neighborhoods, they went outside of the city and county of Denver. Specifically in Southwest Denver, I know over the last few years, we were trying to talk about, ADUs, generations living together. And then a lot of the families did move out. So it was just unaffordable for a lot of people. And unfortunately, that affected a lot of the schools that, we once were advocating, and now, we have too many seats to fill.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. As we are continuing our discussion, what is something that the district is doing to address the decline in enrollment issues?
I know that they have a couple of committees that's happening. They're talking about declining enrollment, the small school group. They're also, talking about the healthy start times. So those are the couple of things that I know that the DPS is working on.
Right. So understanding that there is a decline in enrollment committee, which is composed by community members, by DPS staff, by some parents, and advocacy organizations as well. And in addition to that, I believe that there's also some community organizers that are out trying to get a feedback from the community to share back with the committee. Knowing that all of this is happening right within the midst of the pandemic, what are some of the concerns that you're hearing from parents and community members about the consolidation or closures of schools?
That a lot of the schools within our communities, especially the underserved communities, those schools are going to be closing. So there's a lack of transportation options for families. Families are working. And then on top of, consolidating schools or closing schools, the healthy start times, families have to change their schedule. So there's a lot of influx what's happening within Denver Public Schools. So you have two committees going simultaneously, and then that is like an uncertainty for next school year. So those are the major concerns that we have from families.
Yeah, and that's understandable, especially as the committee is continuing to work on the criteria to selecting the small schools. I think that there's a lot of thoughts from community members on what, how can they get involved, what they should do. Do you have any advice or thoughts for our families and communities that are watching?
Yes, absolutely. First and foremost, speak to your school administrators, your principals, assistant principals, teachers. As I am the director of advocacy for Stripe PEP, they can contact me. I know a lot of other schools do have family engagement coordinators. Speak with them, reach out to your school board representatives, your school board district representatives, and then we have two at-large district representatives. Also attend any kind of meetings, send letters, send emails, have phone calls, even organize within your own schools to talk about what is going on within DPS.
Yeah, and as we understand, and based on the Decline in Enrollment Committee website, it looks like they have 4 more meetings left. Unfortunately, those meetings are not open to the public, but there is a website with resources and information as far as like what is being discussed within the committee. When it comes to the criteria for the small schools. And there is also a page that lists the notes as well as whatever resources were provided for that committee to review as they're continuing their conversation. So that's, thank you for sharing how can families get involved and understanding more what's happening or even advocating for their own specific needs within the school community.
And there's also the DPS board meetings that happen, I believe Thursdays. And that's again, referring back to the DPS website. You can watch that live on TV. You can also sign up for public comment. And so, anything that's happening, there's always their notes as well. So just a lot of things that, we can get involved, and we can also support our families.
Awesome. Thank you again, Anita, for your thoughtful comments there. It looks like we have a question from the audience, from the community. What are the major factors causing decline in enrollment? Do you want to share a little bit of the recap of some of what we talked about?
Yeah, so a lot of the causing of declinement is unaffordability in housing, especially in the communities that are primarily minority communities, and just transportation and, the lack of resources.
Yeah, and in addition to just a little bit of our recap, and we are going to share also the Brian Eschbacher report, which has a lot more detail and information on the research study that he did on some of the causes of decline in enrollment. But in addition to what Anita shared, also the low birth rates, the gentrification happening throughout the city, also the unaffordability of housing, like Anita was sharing in our communities. We're seeing that, especially here in Denver, there's a deficit on accessible, affordable housing for families. And due to the fact that they cannot afford to live in the city and the suburbs, they are moving out of the city and even the state. Mm-hmm. Wanted to check in and see if there are any other additional questions from our audience. You can put them, feel free to add them to the chat and we'll address those. Where can I find out more about the board directors, Board of Education meetings? Go ahead, sorry.
I mean, you can even Google it, Denver Public School Board of Education. It pops up. We can also put the link in and let you guys know where to find it.
We can definitely share the links. And also, depending on your region, you'll have a different board member and representative for your district. So it's important to know who your representative is. They're also, some of them do host small town halls. In addition to being accessible during the board meeting, you can reach out to them via phone or email, and we can definitely share that information on the chat. Any other thoughts or questions as we are almost wrapping up our conversation? There's another question on the chat. Are charter schools facing decline in enrollment?
Yes, we are as well. Every school, I believe, majority of schools in DPS are all facing the same.
Great. We are sharing the links on the chat. Appreciate everybody's thoughtfulness and asking the questions. We're gonna, any other thoughts or questions from our audience? I think it is important to recognize, as far as the charter piece, is that the decline in enrollment is affecting the whole district, despite the governance type. So we're seeing that some areas are affected more than others. For example, in the far northeast, if you look at Brian Eschbacher's report, we have seen that there hasn't been really a decline, but a bit of an increase in the far northeast, but that is not the case in the southwest. So definitely take a look at that report. It has a lot of insight on what's happening locally here in Denver, and some really good sample data that was analyzed to really do a deep dive on some of the reasoning on the decline in enrollment.
And I think also too, in far northeast, there is a lot of more land out there to build. So it's going to increase as, you know, the development in far northeast is happening. Southwest Denver, we're already landlocked. We don't have any more space to really build unless, you know, we find big, you know, developments that are for sale. Other than that, I mean, you know, we're kind of, you know, landlocked here in Southwest Denver. I know a little bit in Northwest Denver as well. So, you know, a lot of build outs out there.
Yeah, thank you for that. Once again, thank you for joining us. Questions can be posted on the comments at any point, and we'll be sure to respond them. Even after we are done, we can definitely get back to you with any thoughts. It looks like there's one last question on the chat, and the question is, will charter close? I think that as we are continue to learn more about the different criterias from the decline in enrollment committee, we can learn more about what is the eligibility for schools to close. So all of the different schools in DPS will be put in and assessed by some of the same metrics. And then there is another question, Anita, and I don't know if you have any other thoughts on the charter closing, but I can read the next question too.
I think it goes back to, again, you know, the committee with declining enrollment. Like, what are the criterias for that? I know in our charter network, we are, you know, just talking about enrollment. How does that look? What does that look for next year? So it's just a lot of conversations right now. And so, you know, if it's true or not, I think, you know, again, it just goes back to the criteria.
Yep. And then the other question is it true that you cannot close a charter for low enrollment? I think that there is some truth to that, just based on some of the schools were directly created to be low enroll based on their model, on their school model. So some of the schools were specifically created to have small classroom size. Don't want to share any examples, but definitely some of the schools had that ambition in mind of having specific programming that require for the size of the school to be small. The schools typically do their own fundraising and ensure that those programs are covered by funding outside of what the district provides per student. So it doesn't really affect directly. DPS doesn't provide extra dollars for the schools. They do their own fundraising to ensure that the school runs smoothly and that they are meeting the student needs directly. I think that the last piece that I want to add, this is a very hard conversation to have when we're talking about decline in enrollment, because it directly goes back to students and families. And we want to make sure that we are providing information for families in our community on how they can get involved and how they can advocate for what is best for their student. Any other final thoughts, Anita?
Just for parents, you know, I know we're going to be going into summer soon. Just continue to be involved within DPS. You know, if you can keep track of what is going on with the decline in enrollment, with the healthy starts prior to next school year. So I know it's summer and you just want to be like, school's out, but right now there's so many critical things that are happening, you know, throughout DPS.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Anita, again, for our conversation. Thank you for being here. Really, really appreciate it. So once again, thank you all for being here. You can stay connected on our social media at Rooted Denver, and also through our newsletter to learn more what's happening with the decline in enrollment and some other education topics. We appreciate you being here today. We know that this is not a fun conversation to have, but it is important to continue to share with our community. For a recap, you can find the links on how to get involved and how to share your concerns or thoughts with the DPS board, and also learn more about what's happening with the Decline in Enrollment Committee. We thank you again for being here tonight, and we are actually going to transition into our Spanish session, but have a great night and thank you for being here today with us.